Welcome to The Rest is Giant Robots, a conversation through the careers of writer Simon Furman and artist Andrew Wildman. Recollections and revelations about the highs and the lows as creatives in comics, books, games, film and TV.
Recording in progress.
I know,
Okay.
yes, that annoying woman.
I'm getting to know her quite well.
Yeah, like I
Because
say, it's
the punters won't have heard that
no,
saying, but there's the Zoom woman when you know
yeah,
it's recording.
yes,
So for anyone who's remotely interested, we can record this in Zoom, does a video track and then two separate audio tracks, and then I mix it together in a piece of software called DaVinci. If anyone's interested in looking up software, audio software, there's a free one. I like free stuff. It's called DaVinci and it's got all the bells and whistles.
and generally it means you can splice together the bit where I start to go crackly, and then we
Yeah,
have to sort of stop the record and restart the record for some
which clearly we
reason.
do it seamlessly in the edit.
Yes, that's right. And now I've just ruined it. But there you go. You see,
Yeah.
you subscribers get all the inside stuff.
Yeah, it kind of we get to around what's about 40 minutes, isn't it?
Yeah, it always seems to be between 40 and 45 minutes that you say to me, you've gone all crackly.
I go like that, like
Yeah,
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 fingers across the throat, kind of cut while you're rabbiting on, yeah.
yes,
And then you
yes.
start to sound like a robot. It goes all crackling. It's like,
Yeah.
oh my
Actually,
God,
that's
he's
just
going to transform.
but yeah, so we generally then have to do a little sort of reset and what the hell was I saying when I started to go crackly and start
Yeah.
all over again.
And we had a comment, we had an email come in on a comment come in. I can't remember who it's from. I was looking at it yesterday. My sincere apologies to whoever it was. And he was saying bell ringer. That sounds like a transformer. Simon Furman is bell ringer, which I thought it was very,
Excellent.
very good. I wonder what
Yes.
he transforms into,
Yeah.
said the writer.
We actually were, once a year there's a within this district there's a bell ringing competition, and our tower captain always enters us, and we generally do pretty badly. But
Yeah.
this year we won the best six bell tower
Ow.
for Bratton, and yeah, it was like, wow, we won something, so couldn't fit our heads through the tiny church doors, up in the ringing tower when we got back. But it was, yeah, very satisfying.
That's really good. Well done. That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Just
six
get
bells, not seven bells, like knocking
no, no,
seven bells out of.
yeah, no, no. Don't know where that expression comes from because generally they're six or eight or ten or more, but an even number.
Somebody will look it up and let us know. Where does the
Mm.
phrase knocking seven bells of beep out of people?
Yeah, no, I've got no idea.
We are a family friendly podcast. So I have to tick the on YouTube, I have to tick the box saying, is this for children? Is this for adults? It's like we can put for adults, but then that has then certain limitations.
It's for adults who are really big children.
Yes. Children of all ages.
Yeah. Anyway, what are we going to be talking about today when we finally drop our clapperboard and start? It is going to be kind of for me, we're roughly in 2008, maybe knocking into 2009, and
Hmm.
we're going to be talking about, it seems very rapid after, it wasn't long ago we were talking about the start of my work on for IDW on Transformers, and this
Hmm.
was kind of an ending of sorts for that. So it was a really weird time because it felt like no time at all had gone by, and suddenly it was over, finished. That's a
Oh,
Furmanism.
I thought they I thought they always said it never ends.
Yes, exactly. Another Furmanism.
Yeah. Which
But
actually it
yes,
doesn't, but at that time you
no.
thought it was.
And it didn't end, and there were, but we'll talk about this more in the actual podcast. But yeah, it was a bit of a, left field, suddenly all my plans, the great train wreck of plans had to be rethought. It was a strange time.
Hmm. But
And
yeah, it was a strange time, and for myself, I was saying before you press the record button, I had no recollection. I mean, my brain is a sieve, as one of our listeners has already pointed out, which is fair enough. I used to have an incredible memory for things, but it's just, I don't know. It's just full, you know. I need I need to buy some more hard disk space in my head or something. But as I had to Google myself and look back through past emails, which didn't go back that far, and all sorts of things. But yeah, I found a few interesting things that we'll mention.
yeah, I mean, I tend to, yes, use the internet to refresh my memory, but also my file copies of comics are in comic boxes dated chronologically, roughly. So,
Mm.
sort of from my earliest stuff, all the American format stuff, this is from the
Yeah.
earliest. So I can generally go reach for a comic box that says 2007 to 2010 or something, and I just have a flick through and go, okay, yeah, there was that. Oh, I'd forgotten that.
Okay, blimey, that's. And had you always done that? Was that done at the time, or was that something you did
No,
recently?
something latterly, possibly
Yeah.
within the last 4 or 5 years.
How many boxes of comics have you got?
Mm, at least four.
Okay, yeah, it's quite a body of work, really, when you think how thin
Mm,
they are and they're all stacked up.
yeah, no, I mean I mean, you know what, a comic book takes about 200 to 300, I guess. So yeah, over four comic boxes, it's quite a wodge of stuff.
That's a legacy. They're right there, Simon.
It is, yeah, quite a
Are they
lot.
all signed? Are they all signed
I
like
know,
like you do, like Donald Trump with a massive Sharpie?
but
So this,
65 to 70% must be Transformers.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
So that's
it's
how my career has gone, really.
done you well, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah, indeed. Right, shall we do the
yeah.
clapperboard, and is it me to introduce?
I've no idea.
And
Yeah,
it's
you can do it if you like.
episode
What are we, 21, aren't we?
21, yes.
Yeah.
21 today.
We've come of age,
We
21.
have. Yes. Right, are we ready to go?
Yeah, press the button.
Press the button. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Rest is Giant Robots, episode 21. This is Simon Furman. I'm the writer on Transformers comics, many other comics, TV, animation, and games.
And I'm Andrew Wildman, artist, well, sometimes writer on my own projects, but mostly artist on comic books and storyboard artist for film and TV.
So here we are. We're back after last week's talking about Transformers the movie in 2007. We're
Two
kind
weeks
of
ago for the listeners.
2 weeks ago,
We live
yes.
in a
Yeah.
fake universe where
We do,
time goes
yeah.
quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think that one's even out yet properly, apart from the video version for our subscribers. Anyway, yes, so we were talking about 2007 and maybe a little afterwards. And we're going to talk a little bit today about, the years that followed that and some of the changes that happened for me, particularly with IDW, on their universe. I'd been doing movie stuff for them, but underneath that, I was working on, first there'd been Infiltration, then Escalation, then Devastation. And the idea was
Mm.
these 6 issue series were just going to build up, into the first chunk of the IDW verse. And I'd always seen it as that may well be the end of my bit, if you like, because,
Right.
it's the nature of things is and other writers were coming into the mix and that was all healthy. But I thought, the plan kind of had been to do, as there were 6 phases of this Decepticon attack on Earth and other planets, we decided we'd do 6 of these 6 issue miniseries. And I
Mm.
had plans beyond Devastation. The fourth one was already planned out, and that was Revelation. And then it was going to be Expansion, and I don't think I had a name for the sixth one. But it was all sort of being, I thought, sort of unfolded in a way that wouldn't sort of make anything seem too forced, which was the tone we'd set at the beginning with this let the story unfold at its own pace somewhat. And then you had the spotlights dropping in and other mini series like Megatron Origin, which Eric Holmes had done. So, it was sort of building up the past and the present, and it all felt very cohesive at this point. And then, something weird happened. At this point, we must be in 2008 by now. I was probably working on Devastation and planning out Revelation. And then at some point, Chris Ryle, the editor in chief at IDW, had met with or spoken to a writer called Shane McCarthy, an Australian comics writer. And Shane, as far as I know, this may be completely wrong, but this is what I've sort of heard. Shane pitched an idea of doing this big kind of not even particularly soft reboot for the IDW ongoing comic called All Hail Megatron. And it not only sort of took it back to a much more kind of early version of Transformers, it literally took the Transformers out of the new versions we'd given them, that E.J. Su had designed, and put them back in their more traditional forms, F-16 jets,
Yeah.
so it was like a sort of, I thought it sounded a very retro step back, given that we'd set up this new universe with new, forms for the robots.
Right.
And this suddenly seemed to sort of reset it. And, Chris told me about this, and I was like, well, where does that leave me if you're going to do this? We've got stories that are literally, part told at the moment. And it was a really strange, sudden decision, it felt like, to do this. Now, I don't know whether this was driven by sales and, was it doing that? Sales figures were tailing off enough to make them want to do a kind of more or less reboot storyline.
Would it have come
But
from Hasbro?
No, I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, obviously, it would have had to go to Hasbro to be approved and whatever. But I get the impression this was a pitch. Chris Ryle jumped on it, and suddenly my storylines all had to be wrapped up really quickly.
Wow.
To the point where All Hail Megatron was going to come out, and my stories wrapping up my sort of time on the IDW main universe was almost coming out concurrently or afterwards or after it.
How
So
strange.
it was really weird, and there was a lot of juggling to get what I had planned to bring these stories. Otherwise these things were just going to be in limbo. So it was a really strange thing, and we managed to get Revelation condensed down to 4 spotlight issues to bring that to some kind of conclusion that really was a whole lot of the stuff that would have happened subsequently pulled into that. And then I also got a 5-issue series called Maximum Dinobots, which wrapped up the whole other storyline involving the Dinobots, an organization called the Machination, Scorponok, and a whole other lot of threads had to be tied up. And meanwhile, this All Hail Megatron thing was just, chuntering ahead while these almost kind of tie-up storylines were coming out, which was, to me, a real shame they did it that way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
And
fortunately you were used to having to tie things up quickly because that was the demise of the Marvel thing, wasn't it? But you wouldn't want to have to do that again. I mean, with
yeah,
something that you'd,
and
flagship.
it did seem to kind of come out of left field, blindsided a bit. And I get it. If it was sales driven, maybe that's when you have to do some kind of, big event rebooty type thing to try and,
Yeah.
sort of bring the numbers up. But it just felt, like I say, very sudden. And, I just wasn't suddenly I wasn't being, this what didn't involve me, it was like. And, it was sad, really. It was sad that things had to be rushed, that certain storylines had to be shelved and condensed. And, inevitably it felt somewhat unsatisfying of a sort of wrap up to those storylines, and some things never got explored at all, really. So,
Mm.
it's funny. It's only later when, sort of James Roberts and John Barber were writing that some of those threads from my time got picked up again and looked at, like I'd created this thing called the Dead Universe,
Mm.
and that came back into play, and various other things. And I was always thankful and grateful for John and James for not letting that just be a dead end, if you like. And then
Mm.
they picked up those storylines. But yeah, it was a funny, strange time, and I couldn't help but be a little bit peeved and resentful of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And possibly the worst thing was I realized in All Hail Megatron they were killing off the human character I'd introduced right back in the beginning of Infiltration, called Hunter O'Neill, who was this conspiracy theorist, sort of alien hunter. And he, it was a kind of weird death that didn't feel, oh, again, sort of very good for the character who's just suddenly, dead. We'd done this whole storyline where he became the headmaster component of Sunstreaker,
Right.
and and that felt very kind of, I don't know, sort of, again, a storyline we would have developed over time. But suddenly he was just in issue 8 or 9 of All Hail Megatron. Effectively, he'd been lobotomized and turned into sort of, something to make Sunstreaker a traitor. I forget the details. So again, I
Okay.
was like, oh, please, what a shame. But it was just out of my hands. And as it so often is when you're
It's, it,
dealing,
it must be hard not to take things personally. I mean,
mm,
it's not only that they thought they were gonna, not move forward with certain characters you created, but to lobotomize them.
yeah.
It's like,
And I sort of felt I merited better treatment.
yeah.
I'd helped Chris set up the IDW verse and, put a lot of energy into that, story building that became really the platform for everything that followed. So I was
Mm.
a little bit, yeah, peeved at just, suddenly, without any kind of almost sort of consultation or build up to it, I was just more or less out, and it's wrap
Yeah.
up your storylines. So yeah, it was hard not to feel a little bit, come on, I think I deserve a little better treatment than that.
Yeah. So where did this new writer, like, where did he come from? Had you heard of him before?
Never heard of him. I don't know where he and Chris met, if they met or whether they corresponded. But like I say, I hadn't heard of Shane McCarthy before. I think he'd done some work possibly for DC, but it
Right.
wasn't a name I readily recognized. But
Mm.
anyway, whatever the case, he pitched this idea, and yeah, suddenly All Hail Megatron. This I think it was 12 issues, 12 issue series was just
Mm.
happening, and that was it really for me on that sort of core IDW verse. And not that I ever thought I would be on it forever and ever, because that just isn't the way these things work. But I'd hoped to
Mm.
get that whole storyline finished before, you know, there was either a reboot or another creative team took over.
Yeah. Yeah. And have you met Shane? Do you know him at
Nope,
all?
never met him. I mean, I mean, he lives in Australia, so I guess
Mm,
unless it would been at a convention there or somewhere else, it's unlikely. No,
yeah.
I've never met him. I'm sure he's a perfectly nice chap, and
Mm,
all power to him for selling the idea. But it was just a shame, and it would, like I say, given that the amount of you know groundwork I'd put in, I just felt it was slightly not the way to end it that way. But hey,
yeah.
Maximum Dinobots and Revelation at least felt that, we didn't leave huge plot threads dangling.
Mm. We ought to get him on the podcast. Find out what happened. Find the other
Yeah.
side of this.
Yeah, no, I'd love to know because you never know, do you? You never
No,
know
you don't. No.
the sort of the ins and outs of it. And, I don't doubt for a moment from IDW's side it was driven by sales and dwindling readerships, because, you know, we were by then, I don't know how many, I suppose 18 issues of the core series plus spotlights and spin-off. So there was a big chunk of work out there already.
Mm,
And
mm.
maybe, yeah, just the natural erosion, sales figures are dipped, and that's why they went for it.
Yeah, maybe.
So, but
Yeah.
this is it. You never know. And I don't think I ever had much to do with Chris directly after that point. I don't think we met up probably, since then. So yeah, it was a real shame and, left a slightly bad taste in the mouth. But, I'm a realist with these things and
Yeah.
it's not the first time and it won't be the last time.
No, I mean because you have a editorial background, so you completely understand how these things can
Hmm.
work. Don't necessarily know why, but things do shift. Like you say, could be any reason for sales things, or because they felt no, they need to actually get some column inches by being a
Hmm.
reboot of the original Transformers that people understand.
Yeah, it was probably a combination of those things.
Yeah,
Events always are these, comic companies' chance to sort of get some, as you say, press and coverage and a little bit of renewed interest. But
yeah,
yeah, it was it just, it wasn't the ending I wanted
no,
for either the storylines or, my time on the core IDW universe. But hey,
yeah.
those are the things. And, it wasn't the end. Funnily enough, I ended up doing at the end of All Hail Megatron, they had a series of sort of half issue coda stories. And
Mm,
I think by then Andy Schmidt had become the editor on for the Transformers line, and he asked me to do a or was it still Denton? I don't know. Anyway, one or other asked me to come back in and do a Optimus Prime Ironhide story that
okay.
kind of dealt with their relationship, which I was happy to do. And
Mm,
it felt like a slight, go on, have another story here kind of thing. But, I was happy to do it. And, I didn't want there to be bad blood between me and
no.
IDW because, I continued working for IDW after that point,
Mm,
and it had been very, very good, time for me work wise. Apart from that, I did two Beast Wars series for them. So, there was no way I wanted it to be an issue, but it kind of
mm.
was.
A hard feeling, but there is. Yeah.
Yeah. I went on from there to do Andy. Uh, I got on really well with Andy, and I'd worked with him on Annihilation Ronan, and he gave me a Revenge of the Fallen spin-off series called Nefarious.
Mm.
Apparently, Hasbro literally wanted to use Nefarious in the title of a series. So, okay, I can call it that.
Yeah,
But
that's
it
the
was
word of
great.
the day in the office or something like that.
It
It's like,
must have been, yeah. And anyway, I jumped into Nefarious and other things. So it wasn't like I wasn't working for them and I was out in the cold. but I more or less had to sit back and just sort of observe the IDW verse from afar. And I only
Mm,
really zoned back into it once James and John were writing,
mm.
which was a handful of years later.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh well,
strange
it, it,
time,
it
but
never ends. Yeah.
no, it never ends. And I there was there was a fan-led thing at the time, which was doing these one-page, uh, mini stories
Mm,
set in and around the IDW verse, but they were purely fan fiction, and it was called Transformers Mosaic, I think.
hmm. Yes, I
And
remember.
mm, and I don't know whether somebody asked me or whether I said, "Oh, can I do one?" And I did, just off my own back, a one-page mosaic story that tried to tie up Hunter's story in a more satisfying way.
Okay.
The character they'd killed off in All Hail Megatron. And
Yeah.
that was nice. It was called Hail and Farewell, and I think you can still find it out there on the internet. But and it exists, in that purely in that realm of fan fiction. But it's nice to know that some elements of it, the TF wikis have kind of picked up and said, well, that can be canon, and so forth. But other bits can't be because they killed him off.
Yeah.
But it was
Yeah.
just nice to do that and get it out of my system, really.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Odd
So
time. Yeah.
yeah. So what was going on with you, sort of circa 2008, 2009?
No, I have no idea.
As we as we've
Uh,
as we've already established, our memories are
yeah.
rubbish.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. In our preamble to this podcast, the little section that we do for our Prime members, yeah, I kind of touched on that. I like when you said to me last time, well, let's do. Well, I thought you said 2007, 2008. So I was already, I was already on, you know. But anyway, it doesn't matter because it's all around the same time.
Yeah.
I racked my brain, think, what on earth was I doing? And I went through all the usual thought processes in my mind. It's like, okay, so those years, right? How old were the kids? That will prompt my memory, and they were like, 20, around all around that kind of age. It's like, yeah, that's not really a job much because they were just off doing their thing or at university or starting work. Couldn't do that. So I thought, I know, I'll look back through my emails. That'll have something to inform me about what I was working on at the time. My emails now, because I had to have a massive clear out, don't go back past 2011. So it's like, well, that's no good. So I looked on the Google Drive. Okay, what's projects that I have on there? And I did find some stuff on there. And then I took a dive into the internet. And initially I just thought, well, I'll go on the internet and see what was happening in the world in 2007, 2008, and kind of 2009. They're just some fun facts anyway, just to kind of pad it a
Hmm.
bit. 2007 was the launch of the iPhone.
Oh,
It's
was
like,
it?
yeah, yeah. I
Wow.
thought, wow, I know.
Seems a long time ago, doesn't it?
It does when you say, yeah, because now you think how many iterations of the iPhone have been. 2008 was when Breaking Bad first appeared,
Okay.
which I never saw at the time. It wasn't until a few years later that I finally decided I'd have a look. It had been so overhyped. I thought, no, I'm not going to watch that. 2008, Barack Obama was elected,
Okay.
first black president, so that was pretty good. And 2008, we were going through a financial crisis, so that
Ah.
that didn't really help me very much. I was thinking, oh yeah, that's why I couldn't remember because business was going down the toilet. Um, but one of the things that did come out in when I was looking back through my kind of Google Drive at projects and stuff, around about that time, as a lot of people know, I've done a lot of uh, seminars and personal development coaching and all that kind of thing, taking part and then also training as a life coach. And I was coming to the end of all of that self-exploration with a company called Landmark Worldwide. But one of the things that came out of that, which I hadn't forgotten about it, but I didn't realize how significant it was in my life at the time, was as on one of their seminars, you had to create a project, and I created a project called Draw the World Together,
Mm.
which was a charity-based project. The initial idea being that I would get in touch with all the fans that I had contact with, saying there's going to be an eBay auction of original art on such and such a date. And then I got in touch with all the creators I got in my address book and said, would you, artists, and said, would you do, if you've got a piece of artwork that you're willing to donate to charity, or if you could do a sketch to donate to charity, I'll put them up for the eBay auction, and then whoever wins the auction, then you send it out directly to them. So I was like hands off in a way, but just connecting those things together. And I had some amazing things come in, and people sent me stuff and, images of stuff they were happy to send on to winning bidders. I mean, everybody, Dave Gibbons, David Lloyd, all the guys I
Mm.
was in touch with at the time, Brian Tolbert, loads of people, Dougie Braithwaite, all sorts. And that went really well. So that raised a ton of money for Every Child, which is a children's charity that were trying to create schooling for children in Cambodia, I think it was.
Mhm.
So that was a lot of fun. It was nice to be reminded of that, and even though I was probably out of work, I was doing something useful with my time.
Mm.
Um, and so I found a Flickr account from a company called NC Soft. So it was 2008. Draw the World Together. The original auction kind of happened, and that was incredible. But then we moved it on to the point where NC Soft, a games company, so loved the idea of the project that they said, okay, when we go to big games events, we have a big stand, where they're promoting all their games and stuff. And
Mm.
they had two projects which were their real kind of figurehead projects, games, online games. One was called City of Heroes, and one was called something else. But two, two like you play as an avatar and whatever. And so we would go along, and they would pay for the artist's hotel bills, put them up in hotels and all that kind of thing. And then so artists that I enrolled in the idea would come along and would all sit at the NC Soft stand. They had loads of computer screens set up. So then game fans who played these games could come up, log in on the computers, show us their avatar that they designed, and then we would do sketches of their avatar, and then they would pay good money for them, and all the money would go to the charity, which
Brilliant.
was, I don't know, a wonderful thing to have been
Mm.
involved with. And Draw the
And
World
didn't
Together
you,
did carry on for quite a while afterwards. Yeah.
and didn't you do an exclusive cover for one of the IDW issues?
Yes, we did. Yeah.
Possibly Infiltration, a Draw the World Together cover for that.
Yeah, it did. So and who put that together? Was that Mike of the famous Bristol convention? Somebody like that put it
Oh
together
yeah.
as like a limited separate run with a convention special cover on it.
Mm.
Um, so I did it as like almost like a facsimile of the we had when we used to do the conventions, we had A4 card, to draw on. We had it printed up with Draw the World Together logo, the NC Soft logo, and the blue lines like you have on
Mm.
artboard. And people sketch on that. So I did the cover to look like that and to look like a sketch. So it wasn't like finished inked colored artwork. It looked like pencil work with some tone shading on it.
Yeah.
Um, and it was Prime and Megatron kind of standing almost like shoulder to shoulder facing the camera. And I can remember, because of their pose, fists raised, but both kind of facing camera, facing the viewer.
Yes.
I can remember you saying they look like they're doing a Morecambe and Wise dance routine. And I could never look at that piece of artwork in the same way again. Going like, bring me sunshine.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, that was a lot of fun to do that project. Um, the other couple of things that came out that sort of popped out from my research back into my old files was um, the work that I did on at the time, certainly in 2007, probably 2008, I've mentioned this before, I was working for a games company called Knick Knack,
Mhm.
um, just concept art, designing environments, all that kind of stuff. And but I was also wanted to get back into comics, and that was when the UK comic, the DFC, was launched, which is now was kind of rebooted and is now called the Phoenix. But when the DFC was launched, a writer I knew from like the small press community in the UK, I'd got to meet him at a convention. We just chatted. We had so many ideas that were similar and just the same. We liked the games, same kind of stuff. So that's when Frontier was developed, the Western strip that we did. So I was working on that around that time. So that was good. And getting me in front of a new audience, which was what I needed because all of my, usual comics work that I had done up until that point had dried up, which is why I was working in games. But I
Mm.
wanted to do some more comics. So yeah, so that's when Frontier happened. Um, and also off the back of all the coaching stuff I'd done at Landmark, that was when I first decided I wanted to do a graphic novel um, that contained sort of self-help messages, a philosophical subtext, so all that kind of stuff, which
Mm.
eventually became Horizon. Um, but at that time, that particular idea was when I was talking to Kula Shaker, the band, well-known 90s band, and talking to Crispian Mills about it, and we were going to work on a book project sort of together, and then release it. That for various reasons that didn't happen.
Mm.
But then it evolved into Horizon, which I then eventually released. So I thought, oh, that I was making good use of my downtime.
Mm.
Um, and then the final thing was going along in the background was the initial development for what was then called Jeff the Chef, which was later became Shane the Chef on a kids show on Channel 5. Um, and I found the meeting notes that were taken at a meeting with myself, Simon Jowett, who's also a comics writer and a
Mm.
TV writer. Um, he was on board to help develop the Jeff the Chef kids project. Um, and the meeting notes for a meeting that we had with myself, Simon, Oliver, who was the management company that was trying to get Jeff placed on TV for us, had set up a meeting with McKinnon and Saunders up in Manchester. Now,
Mhm.
McKinnon and Saunders, amazing company. They because um, Jeff the Chef was originally going to be a stop motion show. It was a CG show when it became Shane the Chef, but it was originally going to be stop motion.
Yeah.
And McKinnon and Saunders were going to do it. And McKinnon and Saunders are known for many, many things, but they did like Tim Burton work. They worked on
Mm.
You Know It May Before Christmas and Frank and Weenie and just loads of stuff. Fantastic Mr. Fox, the Wes Anderson movie.
Yep.
So we had a trip up there, and they took us around the workshops there, which was at the time they were making Fantastic Mr. Fox. So I remember looking at all the little models and how they you make the mouths move, like tiny little fox heads that were only, I don't know, like 2 inches by 2 inches, tiny, but the mouths inside they got all little teeth and little paddles that they could use to
Mm.
animate them,
Wow.
which was fascinating. And a shame that Jeff the Chef never got made like that. But we were
Mm.
we were well on the way to kind of doing it that way. But then for all sorts of reasons, it didn't. It kind of went into a bit of a hiatus after that until eventually, bless them, Oliver and Helen at Ho Ho Entertainment pushed it through and got Milkshake Channel 5 to pick it up.
Mm.
But so that was what was taking up a lot of my own time, mostly
Yeah.
kind of self projects, which I was spending time bankrolling with a massive overdraft that I was building up.
Yeah. I
But
mean,
but in hindsight now, some of them obviously, they came off, which is good.
and just on a general level, this is what you have to do, isn't it? You have to take, because as we've shown on this podcast, some things can just suddenly stop. Some, you can get these fallow periods. It's
Yeah.
very rarely a smooth, oh, I've got just enough work month in, month out. It's normally too much or too little. But
Yeah.
you take these moments to start developing things. When we get, to the death, the thing I started with Jeff Senior, that was
Mm.
in a time where I had some time to work on something. I wasn't without work, but it's that thing of don't just sit there idle, start balls
Yeah.
rolling, start, developing something, because you never know what will pay off down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, for me, it was a pivotal point, really, because not only out of necessity had I stepped away from comics and got work in the computer games industry, which, I had a few good stints in that, which certainly paid the bills. And obviously, they were working in a game studio. They would be like a year's contract or something. So
Mm.
it was just nice to have that security of just earning a monthly salary. So that helped tick things over. Um, but yes,
And
it's making best use of the time, which I think that's one of the things about this podcast that it's worth kind of reminding people of. This is not just a Transformers podcast. It really is just that the rest is giant robots, but so much more of our creative lives have been looking at different things, looking at film and TV and games and self-publishing and all sorts of different stuff. So in that downtime, you network, like you try to find new people, hopefully in new industries that you
mm,
hadn't met before, that you can, maybe get a foot in the door somewhere. And yeah, like you did with To the Death, just doing creator-owned projects and just beginning to get something out there, which is the beauty of even back in 2008. It was possible to self-publish far easier than it had been when we
mm,
started in the industry. I mean,
yeah.
back then the small press things were people doing photocopied self-published work and stapling it together and selling it at comic marts and
Mm.
conventions.
Yeah, I mean, you do have to be adaptable. You have to, as you say, we've all both worked it by this point in TV animation. You're
Mm,
starting to work in games, and that will continue on as we talk further into, the 2010s, because we both end up working on a show called the Mad Hatter Chronicles, which we'll talk about later.
yeah,
And very soon after that, I'm involved in games, and that has become, part of my sort of staple workload now, games, as opposed to just comics or just TV animation. So yeah, you just have
yeah,
to be open to all things.
yeah. And finding a way in is very difficult. I can remember when I was working at Rebellion, my first foray into games back in like 2000, like 99 to 2003, around about that time. And I was driving in and out of Oxford every day. And I can remember and thoroughly enjoying the work, thoroughly enjoying character designing and environment designing. Um, and I can remember driving back from Oxford one winter evening and thinking to myself, I love this work. I'm not a games person as such, but I love the process of designing all that stuff. And I remember thinking at the time, I want to do this, but I want to do it in TV. But I knew nobody in TV
Mm.
at all. I had no connections. They're quite impenetrable, really, as are companies.
Yeah.
It's hard to find an in. And at that time, I was thinking, how the hell am I going to find a way into TV? And then just gradually by meeting different people, you find a little contact,
Mm.
and then just kind of stick the knife in, wiggle it about, and
Yeah.
open up a little crevice where you can hopefully step into. But it
Yeah.
took a long time, but for both of us, it's definitely been worth it.
And although it's not just Transformers, it's Transformers for me that's often been that door opener, that,
Mm.
or recognition factor that gets me work after that. Yeah. Okay. I kind of knew that was coming up. And let's stop this recording.
So we just had one of those crack. This is for the Prime members. I'll cut this bit out when we do the main one. But we just had one of those crackly moments. So I'll leave a bit of that in so you can see how Simon's voice goes.
Yeah,
So
goes robotic after a while.
yeah, so pause it for a while and we let it shake its wrinkles out, and now we're back online. Anyway,
Yes.
so you were talking about Transformers.
Yep.
Pick
You
it up
know,
there.
the other thing here is that, it's so often, even though it is, you're right, the rest is giant robots, Transformers has often been, for me at least, the door opener into other fields like TV animation and games, and it just has that huge recognition factor when you're in a meeting with someone and you
Mm.
can drop that into the mix. So it never hurts just to remind people about the Transformers work.
Yeah, I mean, certainly from that point on, mentioning it because the live action movie had come out in 2007, so it's very recognizable. But I'm sure, like me, Simon, you find um, when people find out that that's what you've done, I can remember one of the first meetings we had with Cloth Cat, the animation company in Cardiff that eventually did Shane the Chef. Um, Jonathan Edwards, who was the creative director there, we had a meeting, and I was left alone in the room with him for a while because one of the other people in the meeting went off to find some other guy that should have been in the meeting,
Yeah.
and he just had this grin on his face. I was like, "You're right," and he said, "You did Transformers, didn't you?" I was like,
Yeah.
and then he just talked to me about Transformers,
Uh,
which is great because it's just immediately, they've got a listening for you. Then you're not just some other kind of
yeah.
punter showing up, trying
You
to
know,
sell their wares. Yeah, because we're
one
so
time,
old, you see. So a lot of these people were like, "Oh,
that's
I used to read that when I was a
yeah. They were
child."
kids, yeah. I mean, I went into a meeting with DC Thompson, the publishers of the Beano and Dandy and so forth.
Yeah,
Um, and the guy we were meeting with had bought his Dragon's Claws comics in to get them signed. So it was
nice.
a really weird dynamic where it's like, we really want some work from you, but yes, of course I'll sign your comics for you. So yeah, it does have that 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 help factor to it sometimes.
Yeah, it does. And I guess to people who are going to be hiring you, they feel like you're a safe pair of hands because your past work, speaks,
Mm,
doesn't it?
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
at conventions, if someone came up to me with a portfolio or, I want to be a comics writer, I've got these ideas and these ideas, I used to say, look, that's all great, but have a plan B. You
Yeah.
know, you know, consider commercial art if you can't get comics work. Build up your portfolio with other things,
Mm.
and then the same with writing. Consider other ways you can get writing work or self-publish or something. And it's that thing of you just have to get something tangible you can show to people.
Yeah, definitely. And also, if you're working, while you're trying to land a gig as a comics writer or artist, any other work you do, even though it might seem not anywhere close to the thing that you want to do. But if it's drawing or design, or if it's writing in any form, whether that's copywriting for something, writing for the local newspaper, or for even a fan magazine, or anything like that, it all helps hone your craft, not just in terms of um, being a word mongerer, as JP Bove calls himself. I
Yes.
think it's great. Not just kind of, how to use words, but just understanding how to get yourself organized and meet deadlines and to
Mm.
engage with people around the work you're doing. I mean, I was a graphic designer originally. Um, I went to art college and did a BA in graphic design, specializing in illustration. I never wanted to be a graphic designer, but there was no other kind of avenue really
Mm.
to earn a living doing some sort of art, unless you were a fine artist or worked in fashion or whatever. But that was the route for me, and I did that for a few years. But even that taught me, working as a graphic designer taught me different kind of disciplines, understood how to
Mm.
use different bits of kit, all that kind of stuff, and it all helps.
And, winding it for me back to the very beginning, I had no idea I would end up being a comics writer. That didn't even seem
Mm.
an achievable goal. So, just getting into IPC magazines as a competitions journalist. You know, I
Mm.
mean, it was just fundamentally just I knew I wanted to write, something for press. And at that point, it was only that I stumbled across, happy accidents happen when you're in that milieu, if you like, in those places. So yeah, you
Yeah.
just have to get in and do something.
Yeah, and I would say I would say for the most part that the best writers and artists in comics are people that have worked in other disciplines. I mean, as an artist, I know that people who just read comics, pore over comics, are very well informed about how comics work and the visuals of comics, are only ever essentially doing, it sounds a bit damning, but in some ways doing what people criticize AI for doing, which is you're just scraping the past kind of aesthetic of all the comics you've read. Whereas if you dabble in other areas, different art forms, you know, draw different stuff in different ways, you build up a kind of a visual repertoire so that when you come to do comics, you bring a different kind of realism or a different kind of stylized, view to it all. So definitely broadening your kind of schooling yourself as deeply and as broadly as you possibly can.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think we might be just about up to our time for this one.
Yeah, that was
But
good. I enjoyed that.
yeah, I mean, as always, there's more going on, once than you think at a given time. You kind of go, well, what the hell was I up to? And the answer
Mm.
was quite a lot.
Yeah, and looking back really makes you think, oh, right, that's got me to where I am now.
Yes. And yes, and it reminds you that there are always ups and downs. I doubt anyone can point to a career that's just been a lovely sort of flat, sort of straightforward, everything is fine. You've got to be able to ride out the bumps.
Yeah, definitely. Certainly in comics.
Yes. Well, anyway, thank you as always for joining in. It's a big goodbye from me, but only till next time.
Yeah, and a goodbye from me. Thanks for listening, everyone. What are we going to talk about next time, Simon? Do we know
I
yet?
don't know. Well, I don't think I've seen enough movies to do another movie one, but
Okay.
I'm sure we'll just move on a year or so and see what we were up to.
Yeah, so it'll be 2010 onwards next time,
Yeah,
maybe. Or something
yeah,
else. Who
yeah,
knows?
yeah. Maybe we're talking Matt Hatter by then. I don't know.
Yeah, that'd be good. That'd be good. Great. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. See you later.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Rest is Giant Robots. If you enjoyed what you heard, please consider subscribing for more and maybe share with like-minded friends. This has been a Wildfire production.